Alright, hello and welcome back to my RTS tutorial in Unity. Today we're going to be working on improving the attack mechanics so we can start to get some AI sort of wanting to sending people to attack the player and whatnot. So basically we're adding ranged attacks from the archers and sort of a way for the AI to work out what units are near them so they can find a target to attack automatically rather than the player having to send them to each other or send them to attack a unit individually each time. So I'll just give you a quick demo of that now. So as you'll see, they attack each other and they'll just keep going around until they can't find any more enemies or they'll die and whatnot. So yeah, as you can see, there's one man left. Well, there's two actually. There's two archers here. And just as a forewarning, there aren't like loads of errors. This is just me being lazy because I like to sort of separate out the debug.log things, and I use the error to do that sometimes, which is probably something I'd like Unity to add, like to be able to have categories on the debug.log, but whatever. They're not actual errors, so don't worry. All right, so now let's get on to doing that, showing you how it's done. Okay, so first off, just a couple of quick bug fixes. The first one is first two actually, are in the selection manager. One was that it was throwing a null reference exception. This was because whenever the player would highlight over things that Raycast couldn't hit, like if the player was over the edge of the map or whatever, then it would throw an error saying, all right, there's nothing here, so we don't know what mode to be in selecting for. So basically I fixed that by changing the decide selection mode in the selection manager to check if it's null first, and if it is, then just say, all right, we're trying to select units. And otherwise, if it can get summit, if it can get a building, it says select the mode buildings, otherwise select the mode units. And that's the first one there. The second one is when we are adding objects to the list of selected objects, we filter out all the ones that have a faction identifier on them. So if you can see here, if it's not got a faction identifier, then we add it to the list. And similarly, for if we're adding multiple items, we just go through it and say, all right, if this item doesn't have a faction identifier, then we add it to the list. This was because we could add, what was it? It was basically, we were able to select an AI units and buildings as the player, and we shouldn't have been able to do that. So that is why that change has happened. Another thing that's been added is on the archers, can we perform action? If we basically added this little statement here, which says if we're passed in an action to attack a unit, which is basically on the action attack unit, we return attack unit hit. It basically says that archers can do it. So this lets archers fire arrows. That's something we needed to do that wasn't in before. Oh shit, I've forgotten. I've added basically because we don't have the AI building units. I basically just made a quick testing script to this basically adds the units to the respective factions controller by using the faction index here, so we can have multiple factions and set that unit and whatever. And at the same time, it also initializes the faction identifier on the unit and sets it to the unit attack set faction identifier, but we'll get to that in a minute. And it does it based on checks which script or unit type it's got, so it knows to add it to the correct list, because that matters in a bit. And this is done on the first frame when update is called, because all other initializations done in the start function. And I know this is kind of bad practice, but it's only in this for this episode just so I can demonstrate what we're doing here without having to program in all the AI building units and whatnot. So yeah, just quickly check the script. Factions. Oh yes, factions also now have a list of factions they are not. So as you'll see here, we've got a list. Factions that are not me. This is basically used for when a particular faction wants to work out what kind of unit, what units are available to attack. We want to check every other AI faction, but the ones that are in part of my faction or that particular AI's faction. So that is initialized in the faction controller. If I can find this, yes, it's there. So we basically do this in a loop. So for each faction, after all of them have been initialized and had their workers spawn and whatnot, we set the factions not me, and that's just a method that says, all right, it goes through all the factions in the game in the faction controller and says, if the faction is not me, then add it to the factions not me. That's pretty much it. So one new thing we've added for to implement this attacking is an interrupt queue. This basically works by, we can call this interrupt method with an action. So say if a unit was near an enemy, but it was trying to gather a resource or go to a location or whatever, we'd call the interrupt with an order to attack that unit that was nearby. So we'd go and so we'd basically take all the actions that we currently had queued, we'd store them in this interrupt queue and say they're started false so they can get reinitialized once they are called. And then we add this new action that we passed in to the normal actions queue. And then we set interrupted to true. So this will specify that we need to add the actions that we bought interrupted back to the actions queue once we're done with this new action that we've added in. And on the queue monitor, what if once we've done the action, so if the action's been started on its next iteration, if the action's complete and interrupted is true, then we add them all back to the actions queue and we clear the interrupted queue and we set interrupted to false. This basically allows us to, well, as it says on the tin, interrupt an action, do another action, then go back to whatever we were doing previously. Yeah. Is there anything else? No? So yeah. Right, another thing we've added is an arrow. This is basically just for ranged attacks from archers. What it does is it has a faction identifier to indicate what faction created this arrow. Basically, that's just so we don't have units killing allied or friendly units, which would be bad. We have a time limit. That's just the time limit it's allowed to be in the world before it's destroyed. Basically, what we do is we move it forwards, or in this case, right, because the sprite faces to the right. I'll show you that. No scripts, sprites. Where's the arrow? Yeah. So if you look at the sprite arrow, it's facing to the right. So we have to use vector 3.right, and that will be normal. And we basically count down time limit, and if the time limit is less than or equal to 0, we destroy the game object because we say, all right, it's been in the world too long. We don't want to have it going forever and just clog it all up the game. We've got an initialize, which just sets the faction identifier. And we've got an on-trigger enter, which basically looks for whether it's collided with an enemy. So if we don't have a faction identifier, this basically means that it's a player-created arrow. And if the object we collide with does have one, so it's an enemy unit, and we get the and it has unit health. This would be like a condition. So saying if an object has a faction identifier but doesn't have a unit health, it might be a building. So we'd have to get the building script, and we'd deal damage to the building or whatnot. So basically, we just deal damage to the enemy unit that collided with it, and we destroy the arrow. Otherwise, so if the arrow does have a faction identifier, so it's an AI arrow, if the faction identifier if there is a faction identifier on the game object we've collided with, and it's not equal to my faction, then we do a similar thing. We just deal damage to the unit health script on the object we collided with. And similarly, if we've collided with onto an object without a faction identifier, then we say, all right, this must be if it's got a unit health script, it must be a player unit, so we deal damage to that. And then we destroy the arrow. I'll just give you a quick show of the arrow prefab. So yeah, basically it needs the script, rigid body that's simulated, so we don't actually want gravity, we just want to be able to detect collisions. We need a box collider as the trigger, and the arrow script. And basically, for it to work with the whole vector3.right thing, When we spawn an arrow, which is basically called from this unit attack thing, we work out the direction between the target that we're trying to attack and the archer that's firing the arrow. We normalize the direction so it's of a value between 0 and 1. So it's like rather than direction, because you get what normalize means. Then we use this to work out the angle, which is just something I googled. I don't quite get maths. Then we create the arrow, and if the object spawning the faction, if this unit attack has a faction identifier, then we initialize the arrow for the faction identifier, and that's how all that works. But I will get onto explaining my faction identifier in the unit attack in a minute. So that is part of the new AI. And just another quick change is that the unit order script, when we are telling one of the player units to attack an AI unit, we switch to using this new debug set target. I'll explain why it's debug in a minute. And rather than adding the action ourselves, because this method will add the target, as well as doing a few other things that we've added to the combat, so it works with like AI. It'll make sense when I've explained it. Sorry. And there's one more thing. Action attacks. Does that use it? No, it uses the attack like it did before. So it attacks target and resets the attack timer and whatnot. Okay, so this is the main meat of the episode, where we'll sort of talk about the AI or the algorithm that I'm using to detect enemy units and to attack them and whatnot. So first off, we've got a game object. Pretty simple, just the target that the unit is trying to attack, the unit health, just the unit health script of the current target, so we don't have to keep getting it all the time. A boolean to say whether we are attacking a target or not. That's important. We've got a list of game objects, which is basically units that are trying to attack this particular unit that the unit attack script is on. We've got a faction identifier, so if this unit is an AI unit, it'll have a faction identifier. Come to think of it, probably should have done players with faction identifiers, but too late for that now. And a boolean to say, do we have a faction identifier or not? A bool to say, have we started a coroutine, because we're running this logic in a coroutine. And a boolean to say that we can start the coroutine. This is just a sort of debugging thing, because like I said, with the test add to faction for the units, just so I can display how it works. That is done on the first frame of update, so we need to wait until that's been done before we can say to the AI, all right, let's start using it. Whereas in reality, once the AI has built a unit, it will be the values will be set before it's spawned in the game world, so we could call it again in start. But for now, we just have to do this check. All right. So we've got a boolean for a ranged attack. That's just setting the inspector. Decides whether you just deal damage to a unit near you or you fire an arrow. And we have a public game object which just acts as a prefab for the arrow. And I'm sorry if you can hear my chair creaking. It's not particularly comfortable. Right. So on awake, we're just initializing the list to be empty, a new list. First off, and then in start, we call a debug.check for a faction identifier. This just basically, if has faction identifier equals true, we check. What? Wait, what? Sorry, I'm fucking this up, or whatever. So apparently, if we have a faction identifier, we set it. Otherwise, basically, just if we have a faction identifier, we check for it and we try and assign it to my faction identifier. But if we don't actually have one and that is true, we just set it to false. So say like if it's a player object, so this always starts as true. Sorry, a bit confused there. So if has faction identifier is false, so that'd be all player units. We can start the coroutine, find target to attack, which I'll get to in a minute, and we'll set the bool started coroutine to true. Now we'll get onto the update. I'll leave the attack. Well, I went over the attack basically. It either spawns an arrow if ranged attack is true, or just deals damage to the target if it's false and you're within range, which would be called from the action attack unit. So on going to attack target. So if if we're going to attack a target and the target is dead, we want to be able to free ourselves up so we can go and attack another target. So that's what that does. So on target dead, it will set the target to null, the target health to null, and say we're not going to attack another target, so we're free to try and find another one. If we've not started a coroutine, but we do have a faction identifier, we set started coroutine to true, and we start the coroutine to find targets. This is just basically to make sure that this bit of code has been called before we do, basically. And that calls a faction. There is a method that I have somewhere. Yes, this test script calls set faction identifier, which basically just sets a value to be equal to whatever faction identifier is passed in, and sets faction, and then we say has faction identifier equals true. So once this has been called, then it's pretty much available for this. This lets this run, because the units don't actually start with a faction identifier on them, because we're not building them from an AI building at the moment. So yeah. And that is just a bit of debug code, which I will explain at the end, because there was a really big hiccup with this episode, and I don't know what it was, but yeah. So now, if not on target dead, is current target dead just returns if the target health dead is true or not. You know, that's simple. Debug set target. So basically, originally I had a what was it? Basically, I had a system where it would, for a unit, when it was going to attack it, it would change the sprite renderer to be a random color for both the attacker and the unit being attacked. You can just uncomment that out or have it in if you want. It's quite useful to visualize like who's attacking who. So if you want that, that'll be there. Again, get random color just generates random floats between 0 and 1 and returns that as a color with the alpha set to 1. And we set the target to be whatever game object's passed in, the target health to be the get component unit health off the target, and we set going to attack target to be true. And then we call this set attack action G, which basically does all the gubbins where it gets a unit master class of this unit and adds the attack unit action, and if we can't perform the action and the game object's not null, then we add the unit attack and set we call the basically if we can do the attacking, so if it's not null and the unit can perform the action, so if it's an archer or a hoplite, we basically, for the unit we're trying to attack, we add this unit to the units I am being attacked by list. Then we initialize the target of the action with the game objects we passed in, and then we interrupt this unit's action queue with this new attack unit action. So this will be pushed right to the head of the queue, and once it's done, we will resume whatever was in the queue previously. And we disable it apparently, which will get re-enabled in the when it's called. If I believe so. Well, I know so. Yeah, so it gets re-enabled as soon as it gets called. That's just like a default we have, so it doesn't execute all the stuff in the script at once. And if we can't do any of this, we just destroy A and we're saying, nah, we're not attacking. I should probably reset that to yeah, sorry, I missed that out. So basically, if we are not able to do any of that, we're saying, all right, we'll just give up, leave us free to go attack another target. Okay. So we also have another method called die whilst attacking. So basically, if this is basically just called from the unit health, where if we're going to attack a target and we die, we just want to remove it from the units we are being attacked by. Because we don't want to consider this unit as a potential target because it's already dead. That is called, again, from here, we just get the unit attack and we say unit die whilst attacking, and we enable is false. And likewise, I added a check for if this unit has if this unit does not have a faction identifier, we remove it from the unit manager because that's just the player's units. It's not the AI units. Next episode we'll add a condition to check for if it does have a faction identifier. We will remove it from that respective faction's list of units. So whether it's a hoplite or an archer or a worker or whatever, just because we're not actually creating units or the military units just yet. Right. Unit attack. So we've got all that. Now I will go into the coroutine and how it works. Okay, so now we'll go into the coroutine that actually does the whole searching for a target. Two things. Well, one thing, main thing we've got to keep in mind is that this is going to be quite an expensive operation because we're searching through like pretty much every unit that isn't controlled by us. So as the AI gets on and builds more units, that's going to be quite expensive. Well, it takes a long time to render, so we're going to have to try and consider a few things to sort of stop that from being too bad, and like tanking the frame rate and whatnot. So first one is that we're using a coroutine. We only need to run this not even once per second. I'm just doing that for a demo, but we could run it like every 3, 4, 5 seconds or something and still have the same effect. That's just because, well, it's not going to make a difference if we don't change it every frame, because it's not going to take one frame for a unit to kill another. So that's why. And the second is sort of the order I've done the if statements and the checking for like if we can attack a unit. So yeah, that sort of hopefully will have an impact on the performance and make it a bit better. But yeah, so first off, we on a find target to attack call, we check for if going to attack target is equal to false. So if we already have a target, we don't need to do anything. We'll just wait for a second and then try again. So if this unit has a faction identifier, because if it's a player unit or not, will change what it searches through. So yeah. So first off, we want to check all the units that are attacking me. If any of these are in range, then we want to attack them. See if we can attack them. And so it'll do this search. So I'll just go to that. So basically, it goes through this list of units that the unit is being attacked by, and if the unit is within the detect range and the unit is not dead, then we will we'll set the target, and we'll say we can break from the search, which isn't really used here. It's used in the other one, but just because I copied and pasted it, so I'll get rid of that. So basically we're saying once we found a target, we'll set it and then we'll break. So say, all right, we don't need to do any more iterations of a loop, so we're done. And since debug.setTarget is will set going to attack target to true, then it will say, all right, we got a target, we don't need to search it. But if we don't have a target from the units that were attacking this unit, we'll do the player search for unit. This is here. Yeah. And this basically goes through all the factions in the game and checks for what units are within X amount of distance of the unit. So for each faction, basically in the game, we have a bool, break from search is true. Basically, we've found a target, we want to break out of all these loops. So that's just basically a condition to say that we can. If we are not already going to attack a target, just as a check first, we go through all the hoplites first. We check the distance, so if the unit is within the detect range that we're trying to check against. If it is true, then we get the unit health off the object and we check if it's dead. And I think that order matters because, as far as I know, checking the distance between two objects is sort of less costly than checking if the unit's then getting a component off the unit and then checking if it's dead. So by doing this, we're only getting the health off units that we could attack. If I'm right, then that will hopefully give us some kind of performance gain. And if the unit isn't dead and it's within the detect range, we will set this as the target and we'll say the break from search is true and we will break. So that'll take us out of this first loop, I believe. So of the units searching through all the hoplites, and since break from search has been set to true here, top here, it will also break again. So it'll break us out of this searching through factions. So we've got everywhere, we got with a unit basically, so we don't need to search through anymore. And it does a similar thing for the archers. Then, so if it'll check the distance, if it's alive, and then if it is, it will set the target and break from the search. And yeah, and then finally for the workers, might not need the going to attack player thing here if we're breaking, but it doesn't make that much difference. And yeah, so that would be one iteration of the coroutine. So then it would reach here, it will yield, wait for seconds, so just wait for 1 second, then call itself again, and see if we need to find another target. If it's not a player unit, if it's an AI unit, again, we just call the search for units attacking me first to prioritise ones that are trying to kill us, or the unit in question. And then if we've not got any of units, or none of these units attacking me are valid, AI search for unit, we just call this AI search for unit, which works a little differently to the player search for unit, but it's the same principle. Basically, it goes through, it checks for the faction access to the faction, because that was apparently a problem that wasn't working, but whatever. Basically, we are wanting to go through all the factions that are not me from this, that we get from the faction identifier.myfaction, which I showed you in this episode. Hopefully you'll remember it. And then again, we just go through all the units in that faction. So if we've not already got a target, we go through all the units in the faction. So we start with the hoplites, we check the distance. If it's less than the detect range, then we get the unit health. And if it's not dead, we'll set a target and set break from search to true, and we'll break, and it does all that the same. Of course, at the end of this, we have another little bit of code, which is functionally identical, but this time it goes through the unit manager units. That will be basically the unit manager just stores the player's units, and it's just one list rather than 3. That might change, I don't know. Depends if I find a reason to change it. And again, it checks if it's less than the detect range, it'll set it to the target, player's unit to the target, and break from search, and it functions the same basically. One thing I've just noticed is that this would basically prioritize AI units over the player's units. So you could move this section to the top if you wanted to prioritize player, or maybe have it on a random chance. I don't know. That'd be your call. And one other thing I noticed was, actually, when implementing this, I had a few issues with the Unity editor crashing. It wasn't like the performance just dropped to a couple of FPS, like there was something wrong with the logic or something, or it was just too heavy. It would just completely crash, and then the bug reporter would come up. And yeah, basically, I've got a coroutine replacement here that does the same thing as the find target to attack coroutine. That basically just is a normal method which is called once every 2 seconds. It counts down a timer to 0. Then calls all this finding target logic, and then sets the timer back to 2. And yeah, that was just to see if it was the coroutine covering it, and I don't think it was, but it seems to have stopped now, and I'm not sure why. Maybe. But yeah, so if you do encounter a similar bug, please tell me, and leave a comment or whatever, or if you have any ideas why it might be, if I've missed something completely obvious, just give us a shout. Alright, and just one last quick demo of the AI in action. So you'll see that they're finding targets, they're going to attack each other, firing arrows, just, murking each other, and green has won, apparently. No more red units left. And yeah. So cheers for watching, like, comment, subscribe, all that shit. I released a new update to Loud or Quiet. Actually, I'll just show you one thing I forgot to demo, is that the player units also have this kind of a similar AI. So if I send all these units to here, they will go and attack these units in the way and try and get to there. So you'll see that the hoplites are trying to target, the players archers are firing arrows and stuff, and they will try and get to there. And yeah, if I just send you to there, hopefully you will attack there. And yeah, see, the player's got 2 units left. Might need to play with the fucking health values to balance them so they don't die in one hit, but whatever. But yeah, as I was saying, Loud or Quiet 1.7, I added an arcade mode, which is like I want to say kind of like a Tony Hawk's level, you know, where you'd have like objectives and you'd walk around, you got a time limit and whatnot, and that's all good. So that is on itch.io, links in the description. There was a little video demoing it yesterday, so go download that. Again, and all the stuff like normal is available on itch.io. So we've got Omega Station, which is my procedurally generated roguelike, which I'm going to talk about more on Saturday, because I've had a sort of second idea about my... I was like experimenting with procedural generation of towns for RTSs, so I'm having another go at that, and that'll be on Saturday. Again, the top-down shooter and retro crime game, they're all on itch.io for you to download if you want. Yeah, so cheers for watching and goodbye.